This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Head of Innovation and Biomechanics at British Swimming, Olly Logan. He discusses the process of innovation and how this is affected by other countries' developments, the performance aspect of swimming and how these are continuously monitored, as well as the momentum at Olympics and how positive or negative results can affect countries and teams moving forward. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Right, Ollie, thank you so much for spending a bit of your morning with us and giving up your time. How are things in your world?
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Michael, onto the podcast. Yeah, things are good. Busy. We're in Olympic Paralympic year, which is a big focus for me now. So, but I like that because it gives a little bit of clarity and focus. We've got a deadline, so there's no messing about at the moment, I would say.
Yeah, no, perfect. I think obviously you've alluded to there being involved in the Olympic Paralympic space. For people that maybe don't know you, haven't come across your work, do you just want to give us a bit of an overview of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my current role, I work with British Swimming. I work cross aquatics. So I work with Olympic swimming, Paralympic swimming, and diving. And my role title is quite a long one. I've probably got many hats on, but I'm head of Biomechanics, Innovation and Performance Analysis. So in essence, I look after all of our kind of competition race analysis that happens within the competition environment, all of our training analysis and work with the coaches and athletes, which is probably more biomechanics focused. And then the other part of my role is to kind of head up the innovation and kind of research area for kind of cross aquatic work. So quite a lot of hats on there. I suppose then additionally, probably not described in my role, but I suppose I have a big interest in skill acquisition. So how when we identify things within the training environment in terms of technical changes or work in that, how we essentially factor those in alongside the periodization and the coaching process, and make those changes maybe more effectively through some skill acquisition principles.
Yeah, I think that that's a hot topic of conversation at the moment. I know I've had a load of people on this podcast discussing skill acquisition and whatnot as well. So I imagine that's a thread that we're definitely going to come into because again, the practical implementation of skill acquisition pieces is a really interesting one, and everyone has certain thoughts of how it should be done. I guess from a starting point for people that don't necessarily know your context, know your environment, what would a generic week, I guess, working with some of your athletes, pick whatever ones that were most poignant, what would that look like from a training perspective? I guess, yeah, on a generic week, what would they be training? How often would they be training? What type of periodization would they be going through? Yeah, what type of things are you looking at?
So I'll kind of give you, I suppose, the three examples of the three main sports I'm working with. Olympic swimming, in a normal training week, 10 sessions a week. So around about roughly, 17 to 20 hours where they're in the pool. Then on top of that, they have their strength and conditioning, probably two or three times a week. A physio, any meetings with the science and medicine staff and the coaches, any like psychology work. So it adds up to essentially, much like many of the other listeners will understand, like a full-time role. In addition to that, a lot of maybe the athletes that we would work with are in university as well. So most of our performance centers are in a university base. So they'll have the additional demands of potential university work. Some do have that, some don't, as due to essentially their full-time athletes. Probably similar on a Paralympic swimming side, and there may be larger variances in how much people train based on based on kind of their condition and their state, but essentially it's the same premise. And then on the diving side, again, they would tend to have 10 sessions a week. We would see a lot more land-based gymnastic work from them, as well as the pool-based sessions. So they are, obviously there's a lot more gymnastics, twisting and turning in their sport. So there's a requirement to be more skilled on land and gymnastics movements. In terms of how I operate, I work cross aquatics and kind of cross center. So a large part of my role is nomadic, I would say. As listeners can probably tell from my accent, I'm from Northern Ireland and I live in Northern Ireland. So logistics can often be slightly more challenging for me, and I travel back and forth to the 6 main centres in mainland UK that I have to go to. In essence, I have part delivery in my role. So I do work with some athletes and coaches in some of the centres, and then others is kind of project management and kind of leadership elements. As you know, I have a team of great staff who work across the sports as well as then a little bit of project management too. So there's lots of different pieces and spinning lots of plates at times, but I think I enjoy the variability and the different stimulus that I get across the sports and across the different areas.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you mentioned with that broadness, I guess if you're looking at biomechanical pieces, everyone's going to be very different in relation to how they swim or how they dive and what capacity they've got with limb length or height or weight or even what stroke they're doing, etc. So what is the generic process of looking at the biomechanics of, if we go from a swimming perspective, what type of things are you looking to measure? What identifies as a high achiever or high performer? What are some of the key factors you're looking for in that space?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's easier in swimming because it's an A to B sport. So we've got very clear metrics on whether somebody's getting better or not, and from that time element. From a coach's perspective, they're looking at times, splits, stroke count, stroke rates. Those are the basic metrics that we're looking at, or that the coaches are looking at, and as well, those are the main ones that probably get in competition, as well as some lower level stuff. I think when we get into the biomechanics of it within the training environment, we're looking to understand. So say someone's start or turn maybe isn't as good as maybe their competitors. We're looking to understand, well, what are the fundamental differences or the fundamental biomechanical movements that may be limiting them. So we start to look at, time of different sections. We start to look at maybe kinematics of the start or the turn, and start to break it down and kind of partly in a reductionist way, went into like a deterministic way, and understand, is it a application of force issue? Is it a mobility issue? Is it maybe an execution kind of skill issue? And then we start to kind of piece together the breadcrumbs and then work with the team to identify, okay, maybe it's an application of force issue because we've measured these things and they lead us to think that. Then that would be a conversation with the coach and maybe the SSC coach to maybe work on the gym work and maybe the technical training to put together a kind of a plan to address that. But essentially, it's very much where are the clues, delving a little bit deeper, getting some evidence to inform that decision making, and then working as a team to integrate that into the training process with the coach.
And in terms of the tools that you use in order to be able to identify those things, other than a stopwatch, which obviously you're going to be able to use in terms of timing, what type of equipment is used within swimming in order to be able to identify those types of areas?
Yeah, so the first thing is that working in a aquatic environment is quite challenging in which to measure and record stuff. I've learned that the hard way over the last 6 or 7 years. So I mean, primarily again, it's not going to be much different anywhere in a lot of the other sports. Is video, and being able to measure metrics off that video is really important. In order to, I think the main thing for me is being able to do that consistently. So having a consistent setup that you can rely on, and then being able to track that longitudinally. So you're not just getting one point in time. We're seeing tracking and progress over time to understand, meaningful change in the information. Alongside of that, and I mentioned the challenge in the aquatic environment, it's, in a lot of this was the land-based sports. It's easier to set something up, take something down again. We have to put a lot more consideration into protecting the equipment and making the equipment robust because of the corrosive environment of the swimming pool area. It's, there's salt, there's humidity. So we spend a lot of time making our setups kind of robust and also preparing for the fact that one day we might turn up and there might just be that little bit of corrosion and it might not work. So what's our fallback as well? Because that quite often happens. Because that could be the key session, 4 weeks out from major championships when you're looking to, track a major athlete. So we try and put in some redundancy in a lot of what we do in order to ensure that the coaches and athletes and us can get the information that we need reliably.
And so when you're looking at it from like a force perspective, you mentioned on the turn, would it be things like force plates on the end
Yeah.
of the pool where they're able to then rotate and you're able to measure what force they're going in and out of that turn with?
Yeah, so we have access to kind of instrumented start blocks, instrumented turn plates. Within the camera systems, obviously we get time metrics, we can get kinematic metrics, and we're starting to play around a little bit with kind of machine vision in terms of auto tracking and pulling those metrics out a little bit. And then probably additional tools such as kind of instrumented hand paddles or handsets to get kind of the force from the strokes, and then I would say velocimeters. So essentially, it's attaching a cord to the swimmers, and we can see when their speed of their underwater sections or the speed of their free swim, identifying asymmetries. And then the other one that we tend to use occasionally are kind of instrumented tow rigs, so we can tow the swimmer towards us or away from us and get force from that. And either they can be tethered or semi-tethered. So we can start to do some really interesting work on like technical change, either underwater or start to understand, what's the cost of a breath in terms of drag, or looking at left to right asymmetries. So I think we're looking to test in water to understand the specificity of the changes and how that then relates to maybe, out of the water work that they do. Whereas maybe previously it's been maybe inferred that a lot of the stuff is transferred to the water. We're trying to test a little bit more in water to really understand it. And it's still a challenge because the water is there. It makes things difficult to measure in the aquatic environments, but then therein lies opportunity as well.
And in terms of benchmarking against, I guess, the very elite, I mean, we're fortunate we have got some of the elite athletes on our shores. And then when you're going into Olympics and stuff, obviously Australians, Americans tend to be relatively strong in that.
Yeah.
How capable are you of getting, I guess, the most up-to-date data sets or comparative data sets that you're then able to assess against? I know obviously you've got world champs that will probably take place every year, and that from a stopwatch perspective gives you a really good idea. But ultimately, you're working on a 4-year cycle, ready for this one event or one tournament. If you become undercooked or you think that you're progressing well when maybe you're not, it will leave you shortchanged at that period. So yeah, how capable are you of getting data sets from elsewhere to be able to compare against the very elite in the field?
Yeah, so at most major competitions, we'll be there. We'll kind of have a standard, competition race analysis setup. Again, with the cameras, we have again a lot of the metrics that we take in competition align exactly to the metrics that we'll probably evaluate within the training context. So there's a consistency and alignment there. And again, it's probably slightly different in Paralympic swimming, but certainly in Olympic swimming, we'd obviously get our competitors and then obviously analyze the other competitors as well to understand the differences, and maybe looking at trends in like pacing or how they swim the race or something, from a technical perspective. Paralympic swimming, because of maybe the sensitivities of our classification, there's kind of an informal agreement and a rule that you only record your own swimmers and you don't record the opposition. So then you're kind of maybe visually watching the opposition, but you're trying to understand, okay, how can we get this individual better, compared to what we know about the opportunities that lie or between in-country comparisons on there. And then that information ultimately sits on quite a large database, and we've been tracking that for a long period of time. But we would tend to do that. So we've got a World Championships in a couple of weeks in Qatar. We'll go out there, we'll capture we'll capture all of our performances, and then we'd, as per standard, probably film most finals and then extract all that information and seeing, okay, where are things progressing, or is pacing progressing? How are they getting that through distance per stroke, so on and so forth. So ultimately, you'll see trends shift in swimming, particularly in certain events. Certain events just move on due to the competitiveness of them and starting to understand the story that's giving, and then sharing that out, giving those insights back to the coaches and athletes so that they can keep on top of things.
And when you're looking at it from an on-venue perspective, so you're looking at the Olympics, I appreciate this is over a longer one, but World Champs are probably smaller. I seem to remember at Rio there being some challenges with the pool setup, and that causing some issues, etc. And I'd imagine that most of the venue go to, it's going to be relatively unique in terms of the setup they've got, the humidity, the pool temperature, the whatever aspect it could be there. How much preparation can you do in that in the lead up to an event? So you've got Qatar in a couple of weeks. How much time are you able to actually spend with your swimmers going out there in the facilities they're going to be using so that you're able to get accurate reads of what you think good times are going to be? Or how much of it is kind of, we're going to do all the work up until that day, and then it's a little bit of a guessing game as to what that actual environment with everyone in it is going to look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say that there's a fair degree of consistency over the environments, particularly at those major championship levels. So the World Aquatics, the governing body, they work with the pool providers. Now, a lot of the pools are temporary pools, and we go to, so the one in Qatar will be a temporary drop-in pool that's actually on top of an indoor football pitch, 3G football pitch. So they construct these things. There's a level of tolerance and consistency to have. Now, local kind of variances, could maybe change some of the flow within the pool, and there's been some discussion around that. I think you referenced Rio there about, there's different flow in the pool, and therefore there was a lane bias potentially. But I think, from my understanding and speaking to people, that's probably been reduced somewhat in the consistency and the development of kind of pool, particularly drop-in or temporary pool technology. So, in essence, it's two schools of thought in this. One that we do is like, it's a pool, it's 50 meters, it's no different to what we train in. And really, if we take care of our own processes, the outcome will take care of itself. Clearly, when you go to a championship environment, then you have, the atmosphere, the surround, all the extra stuff on top of that. But ultimately, when the swimmer steps on the blocks, it's still the same blocks. It's still, they have their own lane. Nobody's going to go get into the lane and punch them. It's not a boxing match. They're in control of their own process, and it's still 50 meters. So if they look after their processes, they've done all the work, then there could be a level of confidence that they can execute to the best of their ability. We would call it arena skills. So learning to perform in the arena. And that's a big focus of ours, of how we embrace the arena, love to learn to love lane 4, learn to love being in the center lane, and embrace the arena.
What type of work is done in that space?
Well, that's again all down to work with kind of performance psychologists, the coaches, the mindset. It's kind of a team ethos and culture that we would have. So, you can see various different ways. Again, you'll when you watch the Olympics later on this summer, inevitably swimming's one of probably the most popular sports in week 1, and you'll see people walking out, whether they're embracing the arena, whether they're focused in the arena, or whether they're a little bit withdrawn from the arena. And ultimately, you can gain energy from the arena, particularly now we're out of COVID. So Tokyo, there were no fans in there. We're out of COVID. We're expecting a loud, raucous crowd in the La Defense Arena, certainly for Olympics, and in the arenas for Paralympics and diving. So you can get energy and use that to fuel your performance. Whereas some people, maybe they haven't experienced that intensity before. I mean, you'll know it from your time in football. It can give the team energy, and so learning to harness that is a really good skill set to learn.
Yeah, I remember having a former guest on here, Barry Scholar, who's a tennis coach, and even talking around momentum, particularly of what crowds and whatnot. And I've actually been trying to get someone who is a PhD in that space because I think it is an amazing thing of if you can get fans on side or if you can get momentum, how do you use that? And Arena sounds really similar in terms of actually, if you know that a couple of your teammates have won earlier on in the day, can you use that feeling of being in the arena, knowing that they've done their bit to kind of continue that momentum? So
Absolutely. And I think probably that's a really relevant point to the Olympics and Paralympics because you don't just have your sport, you have the 25, 30 other sports going on as well. So there's not just momentum in your sport, there's momentum within you as a nation across a number of sports. And certainly having been involved in a couple of Olympics and Paralympics, that is definitely evident. You come back into the Team GB house, you're in the village. There's another couple of gold medals. There's a real buzz about the place, and certainly from the athlete's perspective, they're like, I want to be on there. I want to have something kind shiny around my neck. That what you mentioned around momentum, it can be a real impetus to not just your sport specific team, but the team as a whole.
and I guess it's yeah, when you look at it, you don't really look at that as externally. You don't really imagine that thing, but I imagine that's quite a nice environment to be in. If you're an athlete who's got week two or whatnot in the Olympics, and you go in and you already see all these gold medals around, and you see how well everyone is doing, and quite happy people around the place, it's a far different dynamic to be in. Whereas if you really struggled as a group and everyone's walking with their heads down, going, "Oh Jesus, what am I even doing here? I've wasted the last 4 years or 20 years of my life." That's probably the bit of the psychology or the environment that you don't necessarily think about from the outside looking in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Olympic Village is a very Olympic and Paralympic Village, very unique place. You spend, two or so weeks in there, with some of um, the best sports people in the world. So it's a very small cohort of the population. And it's amazing how like conditioned you become to like that becomes a normality of the environment. So when you leave it again, you're like, oh, well, actually, there aren't people that are 6'6" or, 4'10" gymnasts and like weightlifters and stuff like that. So, but yeah, it's a real massive dynamic of, feelings and emotions because this is the zenith of the kind of the quad for people. So if you can get a good feeling within the nation and even within the team, then people feed off of that. Of course, the opposite's true as well. That if, there's a negativity or something significant has happened within the nation or the team, then that can create a few waves, and you just need to kind of manage the emotions and not be emotionally hijacked by that.
And one of the things, I guess, within your role, you mentioned around the innovation piece of creation.
Mhm.
I guess number one is what does that look like for you in your environment? And two, how important are things like the Olympics in order to be able to steal ideas? So I'd imagine you're in an environment where you've got all these different sports. Some of them you will come across, from events that you'll do. Others that you might not necessarily come across for the 3.5 years prior to the Olympics, and all of a sudden you do come across them. So, yeah, what do you do in the innovation space, and how much do you actually learn from other sports when you're in that type of environment?
Okay. So I'll probably give you a broad answer, and then we might veer off from some of the points. Essentially, in my role, I kind of manage a portfolio of work that's cross-discipline, as in kind of across the science and medicine disciplines. Again, probably the majority of which is related to either software, hardware developments, bespoke things that you just can't buy off the shelf. Okay, so that that's in essence, and a lot of that is kind of project management. And I always say when people talk to me about innovation that sometimes you do have to have the big shiny toy install to be able to show off something. And that's very evident when there's investment of money. Go, here's a big shiny new tool, works really well, makes a big difference. Thanks very much for the investment, and everybody gets the photos around it, and great. There's another side of innovation which is more related to thinking for me, and that's probably the more exciting part and the more impactful part about having a conversation or challenging people thinking to think differently about a problem. So if we've always done something the same way, can we think differently about it? Maybe get a better solution, improved solution, something that costs less, takes less time, takes less resource. That's for me is probably a truer definition of innovation in its wording. So and I see that a lot, I guess, once people get in sport or even in other sectors, they get caught up in the cycle and the rat run of what they're doing. They have the blinkers on. So being able to just stop and get some stimulus and some other thinking, or people who have got good questioning skills, just to open up the mindsets a little bit, go, actually, why are we doing it that way? I have never thought about it that way before. Wouldn't it be great if we could try it this way? That's probably what we try and do, and that probably happens around the start and the early stages of projects where we think a little bit differently about a problem. The point you mentioned around, like, again, going to competition. So competition for me is like the truest test of where everybody's at, right? Until you go to competition, you're never really quite sure. You have an indication of form, but it's the truest test. There's no hiding place. It's the ultimate truth. And then it's also a great place to be able to see things, pick up things. So there's either the approach of you see something and go, oh, that's a really good idea, let's copy that, because that happens a lot in sport. There's the other point of you see something and go, that's a really good idea, I think we can make that better and evolve that and make it more specific to ourselves, or just make it generally better. Or there's things you're like, whoa, I never even thought of that. Like that's completely hit me for six. Like, well done to them, but like we're like way behind. Sometimes you get that sense as well in your pit of the stomach. And when that happens, you're like, some people can get carried away in a little bit of that. You're like, oh, look at what they're doing. And that's a distraction thing. Versus actually, let's focus on what we're doing. Yeah, we've made a note of that. And let's pick that up later on. Because if we worry about that right now, unless it's going to significantly affect us. So hopefully that addresses your point around the competition. So sometimes, copying and stealing and borrowing ideas, that's just kind of what happens in sport. It's it's probably not that often where unique ideas are developed, and when they are, sometimes that's just a step on. And ultimately you see the output of those at that competition.
Yeah, and I could be wrong here, but I think in the velodrome we had that a couple of cycles ago, right, where we changed, I want to say, the aerodynamic components of our riders in terms of like the bike or helmets or something like that, which seemed to give us a massive jump ahead of everyone else in that particular cycle. In terms of for you then, I find this bit probably for me really fascinating in an F1 capacity,
Yeah.
because if you look at F1, it's highly technical, highly idea driven, and more often than not, what happens is someone comes up with an idea to bend the rules slightly, and then after a season or two, they get told they can't do that anymore because you've bent the rules too much and you're winning too much. Um, for you, how do you go around identifying what's a good idea to continue trying to adapt to get more improvements out of it, and what to go, actually, we need a completely fresh start? Is there a different tangent we can go on that might give us alternative data, alternative success, fresh rejuvenation of the team? What does that process look like for you?
Um, th there because of the way we operate, with this kind of quad cycle, there's a little bit of seasonality in it. Um, so after Olympic Games, Paralympic Games, there'll be a review that'll happen. We'll sit down, go, okay, what are the big things that we think we want to go after for next period, and then there's a general pickup in pace as we get closer to the Olympics and Paralympics. That allows a little bit of time for some wider and bigger, bolder projects. But also we have to have caution that, okay, we've got lots of time here. We can, that sometimes doesn't allow you to focus the mind a little bit. It means there's more things on the table. So I'll give you an example. We've had a project that is to be delivered at the Olympics and probably only started about 7 or 8 months ago. So real short period of time. So that clarified things. That it helped us go, what are the absolute essentials that we have to deliver for competition here? There was no other extras because there was no time for it. And actually that project has run really well, faster than we thought it happened, has been probably delivered ahead of time. And that made me think a little bit about when we have these bigger, longer projects, do we just get distracted off by too much, which is a process of innovation because you've got to go through like a journey to find what works and what doesn't. But maybe for these more kind of sprint projects, where there's absolutely clarity on the outcome that you have, and everybody's focused on that, then actually we can move quite quickly because nobody gets distracted away because we don't have the time, but there's a really clear brief. So that's kind of some of my reflections at the moment on that. I'd probably say then like over the course of like the 4 years, then we have like a Commonwealth Games, the European Championships, or World Championships every year. So you start to see things and like ideas come in and out, and things become more important or less important. But generally, if you can get a common thread going through it and you pick up things and bolt it on, then you can shift things on. The bit you said around Formula One there is with around the rules. The rules ultimately dictate how you can flex. So if there's a significant change in the rules, I always see that as massive opportunity because things have significantly changed and therefore there's room for interpretation, there's room for innovation that sits within that. Where things have been stable for a long period of time, generally somebody or someone will move ahead. People will go, oh, that's a really good idea, catch up. Very much like the cycling idea, is, GB were kind of leaders in terms of learning about the aerodynamics and implementing them. But gradually over time, other nations have picked up either through picking up IP, people moving around. So I think there's probably less variance between the nations now because the rules have probably stabilized a little bit. Another example would be the situation in athletics and the marathon run with the Nike Vaporfly. So going into Tokyo, Nike were the market leaders because they were the only shoe that had the carbon plate in it. And therefore everybody wanted to run in Nike. And even if you weren't contracted to Nike, you ran in Nike and you just colored it out. There were various examples of that. But we look across the market of running shoes now, then you've got Nike, Adidas, Saucony, Brooks, all have the same technology. So the variance between the competitors is closed up until somebody else moves it on again. And that's the way, I see a similarity across the sporting world, to be honest, and across other sectors. Somebody moves it on, somebody catches up. You just hope that you're the person first to move it on because then you're going to gain competitive advantage.
And so when you're looking at moving on, do you feel like that's like having a team that are designated to basically go in, what are we missing constantly in the background? Or is it where at the start of one of these cycles, you do an audit process and you sit there and go, right, here are our knowns, here are the areas we could go after, where do we think we could innovate and go from there? Because, it just seems like to gain that competitive advantage, you have to be thinking so far out the box, which no one else is doing, that almost sitting there in an audit process and then popping out, in a way, you'd be looking at yourself going, why didn't we think of this before? It would have been,
Yeah.
it would have saved us all so much time and heartache to go, like try to go through all these little games where there's a massive one there.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there's a bit that takes me back to it's in the sport, probably the sports that I work in, that it's hard to get away from good training, good facilities, good coaching, and just consistency. I mean, there are some fundamental basics of performance that aren't going to change unless something something I don't know of or have missed is gonna come through. Um, so that's the fundamentals of performance. I don't think you're going to get away from that. And those are your bedrocks. Then everything on top of that, I think there's then the opportunity to change and influence. So, if it helps consistency, if it reduces illness, injury, if it improves coaching, if it sometimes facilities helps learning or performance, then those are the ones I think that where innovation come in and help that. It could be a significant maybe finding or in in terms of technique. So any sports that have a technical influence, such as swimming, you know, everyone will know about the change in the high jump and the Fosbury flop, significant change in technique, allowed a massive jump on in terms of performance. In speed skating, the clap skate, a technological innovation that completely changed and allowed to move on. Similarly, we chatted about cycling a little bit. Probably in swimming, within this nation, probably Adam Peaty was a bit of a leader in terms of how he swum breaststroke, a very high rate, very, very strong, powerful stroke. Whereas before that, it was kind of a lower rate, more about kind of technical proficiency and glide. He took a kind of a very sprinter, powerful element to it. And then everybody's kind of taken that approach. So, yeah, so in summary to that point, I would say there are your bedrocks of performance, and then what are the bits around innovation that you can kind of, maybe influence those, or kind of add on to those elements of which are non-negotiables within performance sport.
And how hard is it for you to have an understanding of everything you'd need to be able to challenge people within that? Because you've got, as you mentioned, a really broad spectrum in terms of the sports that you cover, really broad areas in terms of bits that you have to cover. You're going to have a lot of staff that you're working alongside, as well as coaches, as well as athletes and stuff. So when someone comes knocking on your door and goes, Ollie, I've had this idea, it might be worth us having a look at. I guess the ability for you to challenge it, you need to have a base level of understanding of all the technical aspect that goes into it, or the
Yeah.
the data that's driving it and stuff. So for you, what does that process look like to ensure that you're at the top end so that you can challenge appropriately or go, well, have you thought about X, Y, Z?
So a couple of words come to mind was credibility, and credibility comes in many forms. So either I have a technical or deep enough understanding of the sport from a technical or contextual perspective that I have a credibility within that. And I'd like to think that I know a fair bit about swimming and diving now, so I have a credibility to speak with technical experts within the sport. The other aspect then is whether people perceive you as a threat or not, and that's probably a big thing. So is there a kind of a psychological safety element when you're asking those questions, and sometimes not often what you're asking, is how you're asking it. So that kind of open questioning style. So I've been quite interested in effective questioning and how to open question and how to gradually chip away to get to the main point. Because again, I've experienced a couple of situations where again, with the area I'm involved in, probably it benefits me sometimes in that I have quite technical conversations with coaches. But then when a coach is protective of that technical space, it can be deemed a threat. So it's essentially spending a little bit of time in their world, them understanding I'm not here to replace you, because again, historically coaches were providers of everything, and now I suppose we're in a space where they're providers of a lot less and they have specialists to support them. So if I'm coming in and I'm perceived a threat within their coaching and technical space, then what else do they have left? So I'm always very conscious of the privileged position that I'm in working with coaches. And that's then how we kind of elicit those conversations, use those questions. And again, I think just developing a lot of trust as well. So I'd say credibility, kind of not a threat, and trust are important to facilitate those conversations. But ultimately as well, and we're sitting the fence here a little bit, I've seen people come in from an external basis, no threat, just come in and just ask really, really good questions that forces people to think and step back. And that can be as valuable as well when you come from something completely different, from a completely different environment, where you have no biases in sport. I have biases now because I've been in sports a while, and just ask those really basic, naive, fundamental questions, which made people sit back and go, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. Why do we do it that way?" Or "I've never thought of it that way." I always really value people coming into the environment and just asking those basic questions because it makes you reflect on what you're doing.
That was actually going to be my next question to you, which is if I put you into a different environment, what type of questions would you go to ask just to, I guess, probe and one, develop your understanding, but two, probe them around, what they're doing and why they're doing it the way that they're doing it.
Yeah, like I'm naturally like quite a curious person. And there's probably a previous time, 10 or 15 years ago, where I was probably a little bit more introverted than I am now. Now, I fundamentally don't really care if I ask the question because I'm just really interested. So if I go into a new environment, I'm like, wow, look at what's going on. So I will naturally ask questions and probably be relatively annoying to the people receiving them. But I just want to understand why. I just want to understand what they're doing. And if that's helpful for them in the reflection piece, then great. If I'm there to help them in terms of their performance planning and stuff like that, then think a little bit of observation. What does the environment look like? Get an understanding of the culture, what we're trying to achieve. Like it's hard to make an assessment on one session, for instance. Speak to the people. Am I hearing consistent messages? Am I hearing consistent themes? And then, just asking those kind of open questions about, what do you think? What do you think can make better? If you were to change one thing, what would that be? Those kind of things, I think, are really useful to go in an environment. But um, for me, it comes back to curiosity and questions because without that as a start point, I can't understand and then understand any issues or the problems that are existing.
Yeah, and I've watched a few interviews with Louis through, well, I say a few, quite a lot. And one of the things he's spoken about on some podcasts is that he thinks he's able to get into stuff maybe that other people can't
Yeah,
because he comes across as really unthreatening majority of the
yeah,
time. People kind of look at him and go, "This guy, like, he's not coming in to try and mug me off or anything like that. He's just coming in like plods along, asks a couple of questions. Then before you know it, he's actually asking some quite not pointed, but quite strong, like theoretical questions to them, which they're then answering. And I think there is a certain level of skill in that. Is actually how do you ease someone into a conversation where initially it's just I want to get to know you, I want to get to know about the environment, I want to get to know this, and then when further down the road maybe you are challenging them, they don't feel like they've been manipulated to that point. They just see
yeah.
it as a succession of you just gaining information and being curious and learning and learning and learning. And then the learning you've taken has led to the point where you've asked a question that's maybe benefiting them or challenging them.
Yeah. And that's a real skill set where maybe you're limited in time to develop that relationship to get to that point where you're sharing. That's a real skill set to have. And I still have a lot of work to do on that. Some people can come in, develop that really quick rapport and allow people to open up really quickly without that pre-existing kind of relationship. I'm really interested at the moment in kind of storytelling, kind of a link to data and how that kind of elicit a little bit more an emotional response and make people think a little bit more rather than just presenting the blank data. And again, I see evidence of that even not related to data, where people just have maybe a really good anecdote or a really good story or a really good experience that chimes with somebody. That's just maybe breaks down a little bit of a barrier. It's a really useful skill set to have in engaging with people.
Yeah, I've obviously had David Saki on here before, who's
Yeah.
really good in this space, and he did talks about storytelling and how you can weave in narratives. One bit of advice from someone I had who I really respect actually before starting this or quite early on was basically said, if you ask people questions about what they do, more often than not, they want to tell you. So
Yeah.
if you come in and go, listen, I know very little, just talk to me about it, tell me about what you do, it's actually a really good start point because if they can see that you genuinely care and you're interested about what they're telling you, that is a really good start point for them to tell you the story of their life, their journey, what they do. And he said, yeah, for me, that's been a really good learning point to go, actually, just shows some level of enthusiasm when people are talking to you about what they do, and they'll pick up on it. They'll see that you genuinely care, you're infused by what they're saying, and then it gives you
Mhm.
more and more and more information.
Yeah, I fundamentally agree on that. I would say I work with a lot of kind of, I suppose, students and master students, and I fundamentally say to them, if you people like talking about themselves, so through social media, you can access most of the people that you might want to speak to. So just drop them a message, go, can I jump on a Zoom 15, 20 minutes, or go if you're in the locality, buy them a coffee and just ask them questions about them. People like talking about themselves. I mean, you, you know that from all your podcasts, so.
Yeah, listen, some people do, some people don't. You'd be surprised by the number of non-responses I get. But yeah, as I said, the podcast has been great for that space. Um, I've lost my trail of thought then, or what I was going to ask you, which is fine.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
pivot slightly. Um, yeah, I guess from your perspective, when you're looking at the performance environments, you go around and see a lot of different high level athletes in their environments. Um, and all of them would be slightly different. I think it's fascinating when I look at like fight camps and stuff. This is
Mm,
like the extreme version, but each area, each fight camp has a slightly different way of doing stuff, or
mm.
slightly different depending on who the top dog is, in inverted commas. Um, the culture and environment created could be slightly different. I guess from your perspective, what are some of the common threads you've seen in those high performance environments where you say, although they might be quite different in terms of the way they interact with one another, one might be more demanding, one might be more social. What are some of the things you can really nail down and go, but they all have this?
Yeah, yeah. It's a really good question. And exactly right. I mean, I go to a lot of environments and essentially they all have their own microcultures. Um, but they're all kind of common. I would say purpose, definitely purpose is as everybody has a clear sense of what they're trying to do, why they're trying to do it. And so there's purposeful effort. Nobody's there and just following the plan. So that'd be one thing I'd do. I would see a level of engagement as well from everybody in the environment. So they're engaged in what they're doing, and that kind of links to the purpose. And then one that's maybe particular to me is when I go into a high performance environment, um, I feel welcomed. So either I haven't seen people in a while, so there's a warm welcome, not maybe to, you know, a Jurgen Klopp level, massive, but you definitely feel welcome. So there's a hello, how you doing, all that kind of stuff. How are you? There's an interest in each other. Similarly, when I go to environment I've never been before, I can gauge like, generally from how many hellos and conversations, and for somebody I've never met before. So I went to an environment about 2 weeks ago where I'd never met anybody before, and it was like I was really impressed at how many people just said hello. Makes a difference. I remember I went to Qatar, swung back around, in I think it was 2006, 2007. And whenever there's a visitor come, all the children come over and shake their hand and say hello and welcome. And I was like, wow, what a cultural brilliant thing to have. But I think it makes a little bit of difference because it's recognizing somebody's come into your environment and hey, come into the environment rather than excluding you. For me, that's a big indicator of the culture in that environment.
Yeah, I really like that. And it's the soft skills, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the soft skills. And if you're making outsiders, again in inverted commas, um, feel welcome in the environment, then it would suggest that people within the environment feel part of it as well, because they
Mm.
know that actually that's an integral part of us, that we want people to feel part of it. So yeah, that those soft skills are imperative, and it's interesting that whilst there is a performance element to it, the human bit is always latched on to go and you know we want to feel part of something, we want to feel part of a tribe, we're working towards these goals, but how can we get the group feeling one to then be able to get that?
Yeah, exactly. If you're fundamentally trying to push the limits of performance, I think you need that because if you don't feel comfortable in there, then you're not going to be comfortable being uncomfortable as you push the limits of performance and push to be better than you've been yesterday.
Yeah, no, 100%. So I'm conscious of time. So last question for me, which is if I were to ask any of the staff members you work with to describe you in 3 words, how would you hope they would describe you and why?
How I'd hope they describe me.
Yeah.
Um, uh, genuine, I'd say would be one. Um, Caring and the third one. I'd probably say credible. I think that's been a theme, so I'll go with those. I'll
Nice.
see. I'll see if any of the people that I work with then listen to this, and if that matches up. Hopefully.
Well, and again, the reason I asked that question, why, how do you hope they describe you, is a level of like self-awareness. Is like
Mm.
actually, how do my actions from a day-to-day basis, how do I hope they're perceived? Because then if for some people, if I ask that question and then they go, actually my actions don't mirror that. So if I want to be called genuine, but all of a sudden I'm going around like spreading gossip or whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
that's two very different things. So I think it's, for me, it was a really nice reflection piece that I probably had 18 months ago of someone
Mm,
going, well, how would you hope your staff spoke about you, or the boys when they're doing their feedback? How do you hope they want to describe you as a coach? And
mm,
then are you every session showing them that? So
yeah,
if you're saying caring, are you showing them that you care every session? Because if you're
mm,
not, then they're not going to feel that. So it's just yeah, it's a nice question to kind of round off, and a self-reflection piece.
yeah. People won't know you care until you show that you care. So
No,
exactly.
100%. But Ollie, yeah, listen, really appreciate your time. I think a fascinating insight into your world with lots of amazing threads that come out. So good luck in a couple of weeks' time. Good luck in Paris. I'm sure all the listeners now will be keeping an eye on the British women even more so than we're already. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael, for the invite. I really enjoyed the conversation and great work on the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.